Hey guys, welcome to StudyIQ. My name is Prashant Dhawan, and in this video we are going to talk about North and South Korea. We are going to study a lot of things in this video. First of all, we will talk about the history of the Korean Peninsula. This is a very interesting part of the video because we will also talk about a forgotten war, a war between Japan and Russia. I am sure you will find it quite fascinating. After that, we will also talk about the difference between North and South Korea. Finally, we will also discuss this very scary question. What if North and South Korea go to war? What will happen then? Now, before discussing the history, let's just have a look at the map. So you can see India over here, right? We live here, most of us. And then if we go to the eastern side, you will see China. And near China, these two countries are located that we will talk about. North and South Korea. North Korea is called North Korea because it is in the northern side, and South Korea is called South Korea because it is in the southern side. That's quite obvious. But North Korea shares its borders with three countries. First of all, China, quite obviously. Secondly, South Korea itself, right? As you can see. Can you guess the name of the third country? It is Russia. So as you can see over here, Russia shares its tiny border, a very tiny border with North Korea, right over here. Alright. Other than that, in a lot of exams they ask where is the Yellow Sea located. So your answer will be right over here. Between South Korea and China is the Yellow Sea. Now the Sea of Japan is located in the eastern side of North Korea. As you can see over here, this is the Sea of Japan because it is located near Japan. North Korea test fires a lot of missiles in the Sea of Japan, and this angers both South Korea and Japan, and it also creates a lot of news around the world. Now let's study the history. North and South Korea were once unified. That's right. Between 1392 to 1910, both these countries were a single nation under the Joseon dynasty. They pretty much shared the same language, same culture, and had absolutely no reason to hate each other. So what happened? What caused the rift? Well, it all started with the Empire of Japan. You see, the Empire of Japan was rapidly developing and its hunger for land kept on growing. It wanted to annex the Korean Peninsula. And in 1910, the Empire of Japan did just that. It conquered the Korean Peninsula. Now, when I say Korean Peninsula, I'm talking about the modern day North and South Korea. So Japan annexed both the countries. At that time, of course, they were unified. Even before Japan annexed these two countries, Japan had a very strong influence in the entire region. It controlled most of the foreign policy, trade policy and everything. But in 1910, they thought, let's just occupy the entire peninsula. So we can say that between 1910 to 1945, Korea, the United Korea, was a Japanese colony, and it was a very humiliating time for the Korean people because Japan tried to eradicate the Korean language and Korean culture from the Korean peninsula. It wanted the Korean people to talk in Japanese. They wanted them to learn Japanese. They wanted them to learn Japanese culture, Japanese custom. They basically wanted the Korean peninsula to become Japanese. They couldn't really do that. And of course, in 1945, the Japanese colonization of the Korean Peninsula ended. So what exactly happened in 1945? Let's find out. 1945, of course, brought the end to one of the greatest wars ever fought in the history of mankind, or perhaps the greatest war in the history of mankind, World War II. Now, we are just not really there yet. We are not really at the end of World War yet. Let's just go back a little bit. Let's just go back at the time when the United States of America was very sure of a victory. We are still in 1945, but United States has not dropped the atomic bombs on Japan yet, and Japan has not surrendered. But it was becoming increasingly obvious that Japan will surrender eventually, and Japan is not going to win World War II. And the Allied powers already made plans on how they will occupy Japan's territories, how they will control Japan's occupied territories that included Korea, because that was a big responsibility. As soon as Japan would lose the war, the Allied forces would have to establish democratically elected governments in these regions and make sure that they follow the path of free market liberalism and don't fall under the communist propaganda. Unfortunately, Korea at that time wasn't exactly very high on the priority list of United States of America because, to be fair, United States was already occupied with a lot of things. In Europe, it was occupied with Germany's fall. As soon as Hitler committed suicide and Berlin fell, then all the major powers in Europe, they tried to grab as much as land as they could in Germany, which eventually led to the division of Germany, of course. But the Soviet Union, on the other hand, was more than willing to step in and take control of the lands of the Korean peninsula that the Tsar government relinquished its claim after the Russia-Japan War of 1904-05. Now, some of you might be asking, wait, aren't we talking about World War II? Now I haven't even heard about this Japan-Russia war, but why are we suddenly talking about this? Well, first of all, let's just switch the timeline a bit for a few minutes and talk about this forgotten war. It's a pretty interesting war and it has a lot to do with the present scenario, of course, the scenario that we are talking about right now. So let's just change the timeline a bit and from 1945 go to 1904 when Russia and Japan fought a war. Let's talk about that for a few minutes. Now we are in 1904, alright. This was a different time, a different era. USSR, the Soviet Union, was not in existence yet. Russia was under the Tsar of Russia. He was a very ambitious man. His name was Nicholas II. He wanted to connect Russia through a huge railroad called the Siberian Railroad. It was still under construction and required a lot of effort to be completed. Tsar wanted to connect the Manchuria region over here in the eastern side of Asia to St. Petersburg and Moscow. He thought it will unify the entire country. And of course, people will look at Tsar with more respect that this is the leader that will eventually lead us to glorious days because Russia wasn't exactly going through the best days of its existence. So what happened was that when Tsar decided to construct a railway line through Manchuria all the way that will connect the railway line to Port Arthur because Port Arthur was a warm port. Russia likes warm ports, alright. Russia throughout its existence has constantly tried to look for warm ports. Because of course Russia doesn't really have any warm ports, it's ridiculously cold over there. So this was strategically very important for Russia and it started building a railroad over here. Initially the Japanese Empire was not too concerned, but Nicholas II made a big mistake. He deployed a huge army over here in the Manchuria region so that they can protect the railway construction. Now this suddenly alerted the Japanese Empire because, as I told you earlier, the Japanese Empire wanted to establish its dominance in the Korean peninsula and it felt quite uneasy with the thought of a foreign power having a ridiculous amount of soldiers near the border. So the Japanese Empire initially protested. But the Tsar of Russia underestimated the Japanese. He just said that it's none of your concern. You're a very small empire. We don't really think much about you. We have big ambitions, big plans, so don't worry about it. It's none of your concern. Now this was quite insulting for the Japanese Empire. And they responded by attacking Port Arthur and killing all the soldiers that were deputed over here. Now after doing that, after a few days of doing that, they officially declared war on Russia. Now obviously, Russia was taken aback, Russia was surprised because Japan was a smaller nation, it had a smaller army, it had fewer resources compared to Russia, and the Tsar of Russia thought, so be it, if they want a war, we will give them a war. But the Tsar of Russia forgot a very basic thing. Russia had an enormous army, a lot of resources, state-of-the-art military equipment, but all of that was over here near St. Petersburg and Moscow. And in order to take all those soldiers from here all the way to the Manchuria land over here, they would have to use the Siberian railway link, which had not been constructed yet. So Russia was very much trapped because its soldiers over here were taking a beating from the Japanese and they couldn't really send any reinforcements over there. But Russia didn't give up. Russia thought, alright, so be it. We will send our soldiers from here. So Russia decided that they will send a cargo of soldiers, a huge ship of soldiers, right from Europe. They will cross the Scandinavian countries, then through the British Isles, and then through Africa, all the way Madagascar and the Strait of Malacca. They would also have to cross the Indian Ocean, of course, and then somehow they would reach this region over here and attack Japan. Was a very ambitious plan, and perhaps Russia could have succeeded, and it would have been a miraculous victory for Russia. But it was just a very bad time for Russia, because when the Russian soldiers were crossing this region over here, they accidentally attacked the British ships because they thought that the British ships were actually Japanese submarines or Japanese warships that were heading towards St. Petersburg. So they attacked the British ships, and of course this angered the British Empire. Now, although they didn't declare war on Russia, but they did something that will eventually result in a huge loss for Russia. They blocked this entire part for the Russian Navy so that they can't really travel all the way over here. Now Russia was pretty much beaten. It had absolutely no way to send its soldiers over here, and Japan comfortably defeated Russia. And this bitter defeat stayed in the mind of the Russian people for a very long time. Even after the formation of the Soviet Union, they lamented on this loss. So in World War II, when Japan was very close to a humiliating defeat, the Russian Empire, or rather I should say USSR, they started sending their troops near the Manchuria region because they wanted to establish their dominance in this part of the Korean peninsula. Even if they couldn't acquire any land over there, all they wanted to do was to form a country over there that believed in USSR's ideology, and perhaps that could serve as a puppet state for USSR to expand its geopolitical ambitions. Now from 1905 come back to 1945. The World War II is nearing an end. On August 6, 1945, United States of America dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, Japan. Of course, it was a devastating blow to the Japanese Empire, yet they refused to surrender. It would take one more atomic bomb to make Japan realize that there is absolutely no way they can actually win this war. So as soon as the first atomic bomb was dropped on Japan, 2 days after that, USSR, Soviet Union, declared war on Japan, and they invaded Manchuria. They wanted the northern part of the Korean peninsula for themselves. So the Japanese forces in the northern Korea surrendered to Soviets, while in the southern part of Korea, they surrendered to the Americans. Now, at this point, both the countries had the intention of unifying both the countries, North and South Korea, and then have democratic elections over there and form a government for the Korean people. That was the intention, but of course they were not able to do that because there was a lack of trust between USA and USSR, because they were supposed to arrange for a nationwide election to reunify Korea in 1948, but neither side trusted the other. Well, not just that, perhaps we can also say that deep down in the back of the mind, the Soviets and the Americans never really intended to do that, and all the talks about unifying Korea were just to tell the rest of the world that we aren't really doing anything wrong over here. The United States wanted the entire peninsula to be democratic and capitalist. The Soviets wanted all the Korean peninsula to be communist. So even after all those years of humiliating colonization by Japan, the division of Korea was another blow for the Korean people. They never wanted this. The Korean people were never really asked about what they wanted. Of course, they would probably have voted against the partition. But since US and USSR had trust deficit, they decided that they will divide Korea. So just 5 days before Japan surrendered, US officials Dean Rusk and Charles Bonesteel were given the task of delineating the US occupation zone in East Asia. Uh, what was the objective of US at that time? Well, their main objective was to keep Seoul. So without consulting any Koreans, they decided to cut Korean roughly in half along the 38th parallel of latitude, ensuring that the capital city of Seoul would be in the American section, because it was a big city, a large section of the population lived over there. So USA wanted Seoul to be theirs. So now you can actually see that the Korean people were very unlucky. They were never asked about anything, and just bad things kept happening to that unfortunate peninsula, one after the other. So after World War II ended, the victorious nations of World War II decided to sow the seeds for a new war, because why not have peace? Because war is just much more fun. So these were the seeds of the Cold War. In South Korea, America's South Korea, US essentially appointed the anti-communist leader Syngman Rhee to rule South Korea. Again, he wasn't democratically elected. He was just pretty much placed over there because he was given the task of fighting against the communist propaganda, which was very strong at that time. The South declared itself a nation in May of 1948. Rhee was formally installed as the first president of South Korea. And in USSR's North Korea, a dictator was installed as the supreme leader. In North Korea, the Soviets appointed Kim Il-sung, he was a former army general for the Red Army, as the new leader of the occupational zone. By 1949, statues of Kim Il-sung were springing all over North Korea, because, as I told you, he wanted to create a cult of personality. He wanted the people of North Korea to feel as if Kim Il-sung is the ultimate supreme leader who will guide North Korea towards a brighter future where they will occupy South Korea and reunify the Korean Peninsula again and take the Korean Peninsula to new heights. So all these dreams were sold to the Korean people, and they were told that Kim Il-sung will lead them to success. And he also dubbed himself as the great leader. Now over here you can actually see the North Korean dynasty. So as he talked about Kim Il-sung, he was installed by USSR and he called himself the great leader. He had three sons, Kim Jong-il and these two guys. These two weren't all that fortunate, especially this guy. And this guy ended up becoming a 4-star general in 2010. His name is Kim Kyong-hui. Not all that important. The main thing is that even after Kim Il-sung died in 1994, there was a lot of power struggle between his sons because they wanted to be the next supreme leader. So Kim Jong-il, who died in 2011, I'm sure if you go to YouTube and search Kim Jong-il death crying, something like that, you will find a lot of videos over there of North Koreans crying over the death of Kim Jong-il. And there are a lot of made up stories about him that he was a legendary leader and he was quite talented and all that, just to create, as I told you earlier, the cult of personality. And his sons were Kim Jong-nam, Kim Han-sol and Kim Jong-un. The youngest son, Kim Jong-un, ended up winning the power struggle, and then he became the great leader, the supreme leader of North Korea. Now, I would also like to tell you that Kim Il-sung is also called the eternal president of North Korea. So, in the future, North Korea will have a lot of presidents, a lot of leaders, but Kim Il-sung will always be the eternal president because he was the first one. Now, let's talk about the difference between North and South Korea. Over here, we have some interesting statistics. First of all, let's just look at the population. North Korea has a population of around 25 million. And South Korea has double the population of 51 million. Other than that, of course, they have different capitals. The capital of North Korea is Pyongyang. The capital of South Korea, as I told you earlier, is Seoul. And if you look at the GDP per capita, then you can actually see the stark difference between the economic prowess of both the countries. The GDP per capita of North Korea is just $1,800. It is very, very less compared to South Korea, which can actually compete with a lot of developed countries. It has a GDP per capita of $35,485, way more than of India, perhaps even China. Yes, it is way more than China and Russia. The life expectancy at birth is also much better in South Korea because, as I told you earlier, since the GDP per capita is much higher, then the quality of living is higher. People can actually spend more money on their health. So, of course, the life expectancy is quite high in South Korea. And if you look at over here, this is the main thing. This will explain a lot of things. The military spending of both the countries is quite different. The total military budget of South Korea is $31.6 billion. In 2017, it was close to perhaps $34 billion or $33 billion, but it is roughly around that. Now, the interesting thing is it is just 2.7% of the total South Korean GDP, whereas North Korea spends 25%, a ginormous chunk of their GDP, of their total revenue on their defense spending. Even then, they manage to just collect $10 billion for their military. So now over here you can see that this is pretty much like the difference between India and Pakistan, where India spends a much less amount of their GDP percentage on the military spending, yet India's military budget is much bigger than of Pakistan's. Whereas Pakistan spends perhaps 10 to 15% or even more on of their GDP on their military spending, yet their military budget is much smaller than that of India's. If you look at the total military personnel, even with $10 billion, North Korea manages to have 7.5 million troops, whereas South Korea has just 5.1 million. And in the corruption perception index, of course, North Korea has a very pathetic ranking. It has one of the worst rankings in the world. The languages are pretty much similar, but North Korea has held on to its ancient Korean language. The language that is used in South Korea is more modernized, it's more global, and it has evolved over the years. So if you want to experience authentic Korean culture, then you should probably head towards North Korea rather than going to South Korea. Now over here we have some more info. North Korea is closed off from the outside world. That means citizens require permission from the government of North Korea to leave the country. So for example, if you go to US for a vacation someday and you meet someone over there and that person tells you that he or she is from Korea, then if you ask, are you from North or South Korea, then that is a very not so smart question because there is a 99% chance that that person is from South Korea, because as I told you earlier, North Koreans very rarely leave their country and go to other places, and even if they do, usually they are businessmen or very rich or influential people. So foreign tourists are allowed to visit North Korea, but it's rare for foreign journalists to be issued visas because of course the North Korean government believes that foreign journalists will show North Korea in a bad light, and they do not want that. North Korea is also called the Democratic People's Republic. So on paper they are a democratic nation, but of course if you call yourself democratic, that doesn't really mean that you are a democratic country. There are three parties in North Korea, but the main party pretty much, the Kim Jong-un's party pretty much dominates the entire election, and they don't really allow any other party to survive there. And South Korea goes by Republic of Korea. So they are called ROK, Republic of Korea. Now, since we talked a lot of bad things about North Korea, its GDP per capita is in shambles. It has very low life quality, and people die of hunger over there. This has also been reported by a lot of media outlets. South Korea is not heavenly either. The suicide rate in South Korea is ridiculously high. Suicide in South Korea has become the fourth most common cause of death, and it is the most prevalent in children and young adults aged between 10 to 30. Now, this what is the cause of this? It's hard to point at one thing, but perhaps the unavoidable pressure from a hyper competitive society that results from capitalism. The irony, the sad irony. I mean, North Korea decided to become a communist nation, and they adopted the communist ideology, and they adopted it in a very wrong way. And over here, South Korea too, perhaps they adopted the capitalist form of economy in a way that eventually is harming their society. People are becoming more stressed out, and perhaps it would be so much better if both the countries could learn a bit from each other and become better overall. And this unfortunate peninsula that has suffered so much throughout the years finally gets some decades or perhaps even a century of peace. Now, whatever war breaks out between North and South Korea, we already know that USA supports South Korea, and Russia and China, they have supported North Korea over the years, but in recent years North Korea has become more rogue. It is constantly testing the patience of United Nations, United States, and the other allied powers of US, the NATO powers, of course. So it is constantly pushing the envelope, and it is testing a lot of missiles in the Sea of Japan, and it is trying to see how much it can actually do. But the prospects of war are very slim, because South Korea is a very important country for USA in terms of being a huge trade partner. Other than that, US has a lot of military bases over here, and it is pretty much impossible for North Korea to defeat South Korea in a conventional war. The only thing that they can do perhaps is that if they master the art of launching an intercontinental ballistic missile, or perhaps even a missile, a nuclear powered missile, and they direct it towards the capital, Seoul, then perhaps they can inflict enough damage to perhaps even win a war, of course, with the help of China and Russia. Without them, they won't be able to do much. But I doubt if that will happen, because North Korea has nothing to gain from it. The only thing that North Korea is doing right now, it is testing the patience of the world, and is pretty much holding the entire region on ransom. So I think this status quo will keep on going for a very long time, because look, I really doubt if South Korea will attack North Korea. Look, South Korean government is actually building a huge fund of hundreds and billions of dollars for the North Korean people. Now you might be asking why are they doing that? Because South Korean government believes that North Korean government, that is being headed by Kim Jong-un right now, will self-destruct in a few years. Now when that happens, all the people, now of course when that happens, both the countries will become one. But the problem will be that the people of this region, North Korea, are way poorer compared to the people in South Korea. So in order to make sure that they are not exploited economically, South Korean government has made a fund to make sure that they have adequate skills, adequate housing, adequate jobs over there in this region, and hopefully they will not get exploited by people from South Korea. So this is a big problem for this entire region, and it is quite difficult to find a solution right now. The only solution that one can think of is perhaps the North Korean regime will ultimately suffer from a revolution from within their own country, and it will fall, and then the peninsula will become one. But even then, what will happen to the population of North Korea is not very clear. So I guess only time will tell. For the time being, Donald Trump, who has been very vocal about North Korea's continued defiance against US, has tweeted statements like this many times. Now these tweets might not seem very serious, but since he is the president of the United States, we have to look at them. He said North Korea is looking for trouble, so he is warning North Korea. And he said if China decides to help, that would be great. If not, USA will solve the problem without them. So US has made its intentions clear that if North Korea keeps on pushing the envelope, then eventually they will do something to stop North Korea. Now what will they do? What will be the impact of that? Only time will tell. But I would like to know what are your views about the whole geopolitical scenario over here, and what do you think will be the future of the Korean Peninsula. And hopefully you also liked this video. If you did, make sure to like it, share it on Facebook or WhatsApp or wherever you can. And I hope that you learned something from this video. God bless you all.